Oh boy, it is time. Time to take a deep dive into one of gaming's greatest franchises. Like a Dragon, known in the West as YAKUZA obviously, quickly became one of my favorite gaming IPs ever since I first started my endeavors last March. And of course, only a franchise this good can be worthy of the special claims for treatment of getting its own review. Starting off with the 80s themed prequel, and still the best outing in the series to date, Like a Dragon Zero. But there's no need to drone on any longer, so let's just get right into the good stuff already. But first, I would like to mention the title of my video. Notice how I'm calling it Like a Dragon and not Yakuza? Well, get used to it because that's what I'm going to call it throughout this entire review series. Not only does it sound cooler, but it's the actual translation of the Japanese title, Ryuga Gotoku. Anyway, as I was saying, it's time to get into the nitty gritty. As we all know, Like a Dragon Zero has a very robust combat system that evolves upon its traditional formula by introducing 3 unique fighting styles, each of which possess their own set of abilities and advantages during combat. Brawler and Thug is for traditional combat and combos, and will probably become your most used style. Rush specializes in evasiveness and quick combos, Slugger is suited for melee weapons, and finally, Beast and Breaker are the perfect tool for crowd control. The 3 combat styles are interchangeable and you can swap between them at any given time to see which one benefits you most during certain situations. Like a Dragon has what I like to call a situational combat system, where it isn't exactly focused on combos, but instead environmental interactivity and using what's around you to your advantage. This includes weapons laying around, how many enemies are around you, etc. Also, I really love how the combat is styled like an old school arcade brawler, yet there's a surprising amount of intricacy and nuance to keep things interesting. For instance, the heat mechanic adds so much depth to the gameplay just with the sheer amount of actions it comes with. I don't quite know the exact number of heat actions there are as of writing this, but what I do know is that there are hundreds, at least. And that's where the nuance I mentioned earlier comes into play. Every little situation during combat, whether you're grabbing an enemy near a wall, a railing, a car, etc., each of them has their own little brutal heat action to go along with it. And those are just the grappling heat actions. I'd even mention the plethora of counterattack, evasive, or crowd control heat actions. There are just so many of these things, and the right ones could really turn the tide of battle. You could be losing pretty badly, but all of a sudden, you could unleash a devastating heat move and boom, it's a fair fight again. Either that, or you could use them to just absolutely shit on your enemies with no remorse. And when I say that these heat actions are brutal, I truly mean that they are absolutely absurd in their brutality. Just watching Kiryu or Majima absolutely pummel their opponents into submission, or tossing them like a ragdoll, or shoving a box of nails down their throat. The heat actions will either make your jaw drop, or have you wincing so hard you'll develop wrinkles on your face. I remembered when I played this game for the first time all the way back in last March, and I was absolutely cringing at all the batshit insane attacks I was doing. It honestly took me a while until I got used to all this brutality, and keep in mind that I started playing this franchise after things like Doom and Resident Evil. And not only are they badass and even hilarious in a weird some sort of way, but he is a pretty well designed mechanic all around. In other titles in the franchise, the heat gauge was just, well, a regular old gauge, and whatever heat actions you could perform depended on how much it was filled up. But the developers took a different approach to the heat gauge in Zero, as the amount of heat you have also affects your attack speed. Now obviously when the heat gauge is completely empty, your attacks are quite slow, but the more it fills up, the faster your attacks become. But it comes at the expense of not using any heat actions or vice versa. It's a neat little risk-reward system that adds an extra layer of strategy to the combat. My only gripe with this game's heat system is that you couldn't upgrade the gauge at all. You only get 3 bars. You could do this in any other game in the franchise, including Kiwami, a game that uses the exact same combat loop, but not Zero for whatever reason. But hey, that's basically just a small inconvenience as opposed to being a legitimate flaw. Alright, I'll confess, this system kinda makes Rush pretty useless until the gauge is filled up. The attacks are slow and the lack of damage isn't enough to make up for it. But other than that, this system is very solid. Anyway, onto what is probably my favorite element of the gameplay. You guessed it, the boss battles. Much like other brawler franchises such as Devil May Cry, Kingdom Hearts, or any other beat 'em up hack and slash, the boss battles is where the game design of Like a Dragon Zero shines its brightest. All the bosses are pretty good in their own way, but fights such as Nichitani, Wenhai Lee, Shibusawa, and of course all 5 of the Yakuza fights are legitimately some of the best boss battles this series has to offer. Not only are they well designed to test you on all the skills you've gained up until that point, but they are, to put it bluntly, just so goddamn fun. Reading their attack patterns and using that knowledge to counter them, weaving behind them to combo them from behind, using what's around you to your advantage, the quick time events, the spectacle, all these elements make up for some of the most enthralling fights you'll ever see in gaming. Guaranteed. And one more thing regarding the boss fights. The Like a Dragon series, as great as it may be, has had some pretty awful boss fights in just about every single game. And trust me, I'm gonna get to them, and I'm not gonna hold back on how much I shit on them, because some of them are really fucking bad. 4 has Munakata, 3 has Tamashiro, Kiwami has like every single one, besides like 3. But 0 has a consistently amazing boss lineup throughout the entire game, not really one bad one. Besides those gun dudes on the pier, they can suck my dick. Yeah, all of them are great besides those gun guys. Yeah. Spoiler alert for anyone who's trying to get into the series. If there's a boss or enemy with a gun in a RGG game, they're probably a really bad fight. Tasers too, those guys can just go fuck themselves. With all the dick riding I've spent the past, 5 minutes doing, I think it's time that I finally addressed one big flaw I have with this game's combat. The biggest flaw actually, and that's the lack of difficulty. There's such a low skill level required for a majority of this game that you could easily steamroll everything on hard difficulty aside from like the finale. Not helping is the fact that certain styles such as Beast, Slugger, and Breaker are hilariously overpowered. The mechanics are awesome at all, but I just wish that the game upped the difficulty a bit so you had more incentive to use them. The low skill cap can even lead to some repetition at times, as only the bare minimum are really all you'll need to get through most of these fights. Aside from the bosses, Like a Dragon Zero is just simply put, too easy. Granted, it's not quite pathetic like Sonic Unleashes Night Stages or Devil May Cry 2, let me make that very clear, but some more tougher battles throughout would have been nice. That way, you get more encouragement to hone your skills, and so the boss battles won't feel like difficulty spikes. Alright, one last thing I gotta address before I wrap up this segment. As most of you may know, both characters receive their very own minigame, Kiryu with his real estate business and Majima with his cabaret club management. Both of which are great in several different ways. For one thing, they're surprisingly fun as hell. Well, Majima's cabaret club is at least. I actually found myself pouring a lot more time into it than I would have ever anticipated. Kiryu's real estate is a little grindy, but it's neat for what it is. Getting back on track, they're both great activities to do when you just want to take a break from the main story's insanity, or if you just want to throw some extra yen in your pocket. Spend a solid amount of time with these 2 minigames and you can actually get pretty far in terms of upgrades. It's also amazing how these 2 minigames have their own little story within the game's main story. And speaking of which, it's finally time to discuss what is perhaps the most notable aspect of this franchise, the storytelling. And goddamn, I am not joking when I say that this is the best story in the franchise, easily. Not only that, but it might as well be my favorite story in any piece of media, ever. It's that type of story that keeps you emotionally invested in not only the characters and their motivations, but the story beats, the set pieces, the world building, everything is super compelling and will surely keep you on the edge of your seat at all times, eager to see how the next event unfolds, and what consequences will come out of them. Also, I would like to mention that spoilers will be included in this video, so if you haven't played the game yet, and would like to, which I highly suggest that you do, I recommend skipping to this point in the video. And with that being said, here we go. The plot is really damn good, and it's definitely the most coherent and well-written one of the franchise, but that's pretty much secondary compared to the characterization. These characters are written so well, pretty much every single one of them, like all of them. Hell, even the henchman that killed Tachibana. Okay, never mind, he can burn in the deepest pits of hell, but everybody else, all incredible characters. each one oozing with personality, each one also having clear motivations and ideals. What I love about the characters in this game is that they each serve a role, each of them have their own purpose, and with that, each of them try their damnedest to persevere through the toughest of times in order to achieve what they desire. Such as Kiryu going so far as leaving the Tojo clan just to try and prove the innocence of his adoptive father, Majima taking a hit just so he could return to the Yakuza, Tachibana going through all that shit he went through just so he could be reunited with his sister again. Like I said before, these characters are written so beautifully, and you'll surely have at least some degree of emotional investment in them. So when the going gets tough for them, you'll definitely be rooting for them. Hell, they managed to make a blind woman be one of the best characters in this game. Seriously, I had such a quick attachment to Makoto. All I wanted to do was just see her happy. She suffered so much, damn it. And I know I'm dragging on a bit, but I just find it so impressive how the writers managed to make every single character memorable in their own way. Kuze with his perseverance, and how he just never says the fuck down. Nishitani with his influence on Majima, and his amazing personality. I just love his craziness. He's crazy, but in such an endearing way. I just love him. His performance is amazing. Lao Gui being arguably the most sinister villain in this franchise. I mean, he's an assassin who has killed every single person he was tasked with killing. And trust me, look at that design. Dude's a fucking monster. And of course, one of my personal favorites, Tsukasa Sagawa. Such a great goddamn character. On the surface, he's just a big, dickish goofball with antics that are honestly fun to watch, much like Nishitani. But, you know, down to a science. He's not insane or rabid or anything. But some of his snarky little comments actually made me giggle at points. But he actually has quite a bit of depth to his character. He may have been an absolute dick, but deep down you can tell that he truly did care about Majima, which can clearly be seen prior to his final moments. Which, by the way, was such a perfect send-off for a nearly perfect character. So yeah, the plot, the characters, both are absolutely fantastic, but there's still one thing about this game that I haven't touched upon, and that's the cinematography. Like a Dragon is a franchise that's well known for its very cinematic approach to their stories, and Zero is incredibly strong in that regard. For one thing, the shot compositions are amazing, and how they contribute to the tone of a particular scene. This can intensify certain situations, while emphasizing characters' emotions during others. Perhaps the best example of this is the ending of Chapter 4. Just look at the shot of Majima's reflection on the knife that beautifully emphasizes the contemplation he feels toward killing Makoto. Should he kill her, allowing him to return to Shimano's good graces? Or should he stick to his morals and, you know, not kill a crying blind woman who is pleading for mercy, having no idea why people are trying to kill her? Deep as shit. Talking about the specific scene actually brings me to yet another thing I love about the story. The individual moments and set pieces. You can make a list of these moments that's so long you could honestly spend nearly an entire day just talking about them. The scene where Nishiki nearly shoots Kiryu in Chapter 6, Makoto warning Tachibana in Chapter 14, Kiryu and Nishiki tearing their shirts off, revealing their unfinished tats on also Chapter 14, Shibusawa spewing his ideals prior to his confrontation with Kiryu, Makoto digging up her old watch that Majima left for her as a memento. Just so many moments that will truly heighten your emotional investment in the story. So, a little recap for those who had to skip this portion because of spoilers. Like a Dragon Zero offers an incredibly strong narrative with a consistent and perpetually engaging plot that doesn't suffer from obnoxious plot twists and radical pacing shifts. The characters, every single one of them, especially the villains, are all very well written, offer quite a bit of depth, and are just plain fun to watch. Storytelling elements such as cinematography, tone, and voice acting also contribute to the story's cinematic vibe and are all amazing, especially the voice acting. The story is piled high with plenty of hype moments that'll have you screaming your ass off, or crying like a little bitch. So yeah, absolutely perfect story. I genuinely cannot think of anything wrong with it besides maybe a few little insignificant things here and there. But anyway, this is easily my favorite video game story, and maybe my favorite story in any piece of media, and I'm just gonna leave it at that. I'm currently in the editing process of this video, and I just now came up with yet another thing I want to say that I just hadn't thought of until now. Anyway, after going through the series a second time after playing it for the first time last year, I've come to notice that Like a Dragon Zero's story really plays into the series' strengths, and that's just one of the many reasons why I praise this game's story to such a high degree. If there's two big things that this franchise is known for, narratively, it's the character development and wild conspiracy plots. Now typically the franchise will favor either one or the other between each and every game. You either have games with strong characterization where the conspiracy plots aren't highlighted as much like in 5 and 7. Then you've got games that have some good character moments, but are mostly shunned by the dumb conspiracy plots like in 3 and 4. Like a Dragon Zero comes in and says, hey, why don't we strike the perfect balance between both of these elements? As I said numerous times throughout this video, the character writing is top notch, but the conspiracy plot is almost as equally engaging. The two elements really work together in harmony instead of against each other, which is something that has unfortunately plagued a good chunk of this franchise. Alright, I'm finished now. This is a bit of a weird one for me. On one hand, the cinematic cutscenes look amazing, and the art style really makes Kamurocho and Sotenbori look like bustling, gorgeous cities. But, on the other hand, I have some slight issues with the way some of the NPCs look. Like, their faces definitely have detail with shit like facial hair, but the low resolution and polygon count makes them look a bit muddled. This is especially noticeable during sub-stories when you get really close to these NPCs, and you start to notice all the little imperfections with the game's in-engine models. Also, some of these NPCs are just fucking hideous. Like, what the hell is up with Steven Spinan? He looks like my sleep paralysis demon. But aside from a few gripes I have with the engine textures, I still think this game looks pretty good. Not fantastic or anything, aside from the CGI cutscenes obviously, but still very solid for a late PS3 title. Hoo boy, where do I even begin with this utter masterpiece? Banner after banner on this goddamn thing. There are no weak songs. Every single track hits harder than Kiryu's Dragon Drop. From the regular battle themes to the cutscene ambience, to the boss battle tunes, every single tune not only bangs, but perfectly amplifies the emotion and impact of whatever moment they're being used for. And the sheer amount of diversity used in this OST is great as well. Throughout the game, you'll hear fusions of rock, industrial, EDM, jazz, and metal that sound awesome on some tracks and borderline brilliant on others. Another thing that works about this soundtrack's versatility is that despite the many different styles it uses, none of it feels out of place within the overall game. Nearly every track offers something different while simultaneously retaining the core vibe and atmosphere that the game delivers. So each and every track feels like it belongs in the game, no matter how different they may sound from each other. I found myself often making comparisons to the soundtracks of both Sonic Adventure games. I mean, with the way both meld hard rock music with a variety of different genres and styles, and having the musical know-how to make it all sound cohesive, the two games are really one and the same. And much like those adventure soundtracks, Like a Dragon Zero's OST just has so many bangers, you can probably already tell since I've been using the game's music throughout the entire video. But simply using it as background music doesn't quite do it the justice this soundtrack deserves. Honestly, not even listening to it on streaming won't do it justice either. Just hear it in game and you'll immediately see where I'm coming from. Little disclaimer before I begin discussing this category. Since every single game in this franchise each has a myriad of content, I'm going to rate this category based on a different set of standards with this series of videos. See, with Devil May Cry and Halo, there really isn't a whole lot of content, especially compared to Like a Dragon. So if I were to view this series under those standards, then every single game would be a 10. It's just more fair, you know? And having said that, this particular game has some of the biggest abundance of content in the franchise. Even with those aforementioned standards in mind, this game still blows my mind with just how much shit there is to do. Like, if you were to walk down just a single street, I guarantee you'd find at least one or two activities you engage yourself with. From arcade games, to sub-stories, to the disco, to karaoke, to Kiryu and Majima's business minigames, to watching porn, to the main story itself, there is hours upon hours upon hours of shit to do. For instance, I'm about a good 40 hours into this save file, the one I use to record this video with, and I'm only like 21% finished with the game. That's it. If that statistic right there doesn't fully prove to you just how much filled to the brim this game is, then perhaps the best way to truly find out is to discover it all for yourself. And I highly suggest that you do, by the way. And all this content is amazing and worthwhile as well. Well, except for maybe the cat fights, because that shit is so blatantly rigged. But other than that, all the content featured in this game is either solid or so insanely fun that pulling you away from the main story could become a common occurrence. That's something that I did quite a bit. And I haven't gotten to the sub-stories yet, aka the cream of the crop in the whole Like a Dragon franchise. So many memorable sub-stories that not only allow the character's personality to truly flourish, but it also adds into the already impressive world building by bringing the two locations to life. And the variety of sub-stories is amazing as well. They could be heartwarming, hilarious, tense, and sometimes really fucking weird, but still awesome. Like, there's one where you have to discreetly purchase a porno mag for a young boy, even though he has no idea what it is. There's another one where Majima infiltrates his money-grubbing cult and does a funny dance move. And speaking of dancing, how could I possibly forget about the Miracle Johnson sub-stories? Not only the best sub-story in this game, but maybe in the entire franchise. It's really a tough one to beat. So overall, the amount of content in this game will not only have you occupied for nearly 200 hours, based on the average time it takes to beat it, but also plays into the core concept of the game. Tons of ridiculously fun activities, plus a brilliant amount of world building. Sign me the hell up. The game is in 60 FPS, which is always a good thing. However, I notice that the game will at times stutter a bit when I'm just wandering around in the streets. Sometimes the game will just stop for like half a second, which isn't super detrimental, you know, considering this has only happened in the hub worlds and never during combat, but it's still a minor annoyance nonetheless. Also, texture pop-ins, very noticeable texture pop-ins, are fairly common as well. Overall, the game runs extremely well, combat is super fluid, and looks gorgeous with those 60 frames per second. However, those little instances of lag and texture pop-in bring the score down just a tad. This is an interesting category since this is the one game I've discussed so far that cannot be completed in a single sit-in. Well, I mean, you could theoretically beat it in a single sit-in, but you do have to have a lot of free time in your hands for that. Anyway, I think the best distinction I can make in regards to this game's replay value is that it really depends on the person. Are you willing to sit through a 32-hour story that specializes in content more than once? Or are you the type of guy who prefers a short, 10-hour story that incentivizes extra replays? Personally, I think this game is actually really replayable. Not only because it's just a fantastic product all around, but maxing out all of your upgrades might be more fun to do on a New Game Plus file, as opposed to just doing it all in Premium Adventure. The game might be a little too long for the average player to want to revisit, but for me, I'd replay this game's story a billion times over again. So, there you have it. The first game I've reviewed so far to receive at least a 90, and I can't really think of another game that truly deserved that commendation first. Like a Dragon Zero was just an all-around amazing and impeccable experience, one that I will surely never forget. From my very first playthrough last March, to my recent endeavors in 100% in the game, something I'm still very far off from doing by the way, I will always cherish this game and will constantly torment my friends into playing it. There was so much more I could have said about this game since it really offers that much to talk about, but I can't make my videos too long now, can I? And besides, I gotta gear for more review and analysis videos for the rest of this franchise, you know, along with other franchises as well. I promise you I will get to my Devil May Cry 5 review soon. I've just wanted to make videos about Halo and Like a Dragon for a while now. Anyway, it's gonna be a really fun ride to say the least. So stick around, as plenty more Like a Dragon video essays will surely be on the way. Just remind me to never slack off this bad again.